40 years ago, an old friend of mine called in a favor with a friend of his and got me a job with a large commercial beekeeper in southern Oregon. It was in a little town called Central Point. It was little then. They tell me it's grown up quite a bit since then. It's not very far from the Northern California border. At that time, it was a pretty good place for keeping bees. And I've been told, I haven't been there in a long time, I've been told it's grown up quite a bit and probably a little harder to make a living as a commercial beekeeper now than it was then. But I hired on with this guy thinking I would get an opportunity to be a beekeeper. And at first, that's not at all what happened. He didn't know I was a beekeeper and was interested in beekeeping. He hired me on to put me in his wood shop. He had a 6 or 8 man wood shop that he would make custom items for anybody. If you custom lids, pallets, frames, boxes, pollen traps, anything. The first job we did when I hired into that wood shop was make 2,000 pollen traps for CC Pollen Company down in Arizona. At first I was disappointed that I wasn't going right into his beekeeping part of his business, but it didn't take me long to figure out that I was having a tremendous opportunity there in his wood shop to learn how to do things right. He taught me that size does matter when it comes to beekeeping equipment. A 1/16 of an inch or an 1/8 of an inch off does make a difference in the long run. You're best to do it right the first time, and you'll have a lot less trouble in the future. And I've kind of held on to that philosophy and practiced it over the years. The other thing I learned by working in that wood shop is if you're poor and you want to be a beekeeper and make your living at it, a really good thing to do is to get your hands on a table saw and a radial arm saw and learn how to use them. You can really create a lot of material on a shoestring budget if you just know how to run a small wood shop, and that's what I did in the beginning. I would try to find wood and scraps just about anywhere I could. I'd cruise through construction sites. I'd pick a board up off the ground anywhere if I thought it'd make any part of a beehive, and that's really how I got going in the beginning. That's how I built my outfit with really no money. I just watched for any opportunity to collect scrap and build bee boxes or lids or whatever. And I'm fortunate now that I have a pretty nice wood shop. I'll give you a small tour of the equipment we have here, and you'll see it from time to time in my videos. I have good equipment. Again, I'd recommend people getting their own equipment and learning how to use it if you want to build an outfit on a shoestring budget. For a cutoff saw, I use this really old Dewalt 12-inch saw. They made hundreds of thousands of these things during World War II. If I remember correctly, Mr. Dewalt, who invented the radial arm saw, started making them in the late 1920s. And then in the 40s, the Army ordered hundreds of thousands from him, and that's really what made the Dewalt name really big. This saw was made in 1948. It's not much different than the ones that were made in World War II. And it's a beast. It'll cut anything you want to cut. I've used 10-inch radial arm saws, 9-inch radial arm saws, 10-inch and 12-inch sliding miter saws for cutoff saws, and I really prefer this big old 12-inch radial arm saw. It's very precise. One of the things it will do that all those other saws I mentioned won't is it'll cut at least 16 1/4 inches, so you can cut plywood that makes lids and bottom boards and things like that with it. I've been really pleased with it. A lot of people don't like using radial arm saws because they say they're dangerous. Sometimes they'll try to pull themselves through the wood, and I wanted to show you a little trick about that. Let's see if you can get a close-up on this blade, Seth. There's such a thing as a dedicated radial arm saw blade, and it's about these teeth. If you look at them carefully, they're not hooked forward. They're actually hooked backwards just 2 or 3 degrees, and that keeps the saw from trying to climb through the wood, and much less dangerous that way. And I'm quite comfortable using the radial arm saw because of these type of blades. I have a through fence dust collection system on this radial arm. It really makes a difference. A lot of radial arms or miter saws just have a hood that collects the dust. This through fence is really the key. If you look at the dust that's around this radial arm saw, that's from 3 straight days of cutting. This really does pick up most of the dust, so it works really good. The other thing that makes work a lot easier is this, I guess you'd call it a swing stop fence with all these different stops for the different pieces. You don't have to stop and measure. You just go to the stop that's already set to the dimension you want. I'll put a link to this manufacturer in the video description. Over here we're using a Delta Unisaw for doing all the ripping and the dado cuts. That's something you typically see in a cabinet shop. It's a notch above the typical contractor saw. I worked for years on an old contractor saw. It's so nice to have a good cabinet, great table saw to do this stuff with. We try to keep our blades sharp. My opinion is a sharp blade is less dangerous than a dull blade. And you have to be so careful around this equipment. It's so easy to cut a finger off. I don't know how through hundreds and hundreds of thousands of cuts I've managed to keep my fingers, but somehow I have. It's really easy to get really tired at the end of the day and to forget what you're doing and just kind of get mechanical. You really have to be mindful and stay focused on every cut so you don't do something stupid, get a board kicked back and hit you, or get your finger caught in a table saw blade or something like that. We absolutely do not wear gloves when we're around this machinery. It's really easy for a thread on a glove to get caught on a blade and pull your finger in. And we don't wear any flannel shirts with tails or anything that could get loose and get in a blade. That's important too. For making all our dado cuts, I prefer a stacking dado set to the wobble blade type. They're a little more precise, better balanced. They do a better job. I made up this sacrificial fence. I call it sacrificial because we put the dado blade right against it. I don't want to mess up my good fence, so I'll put this over that, and the dado blade for making this rabbet joint on the edges of this inboard will go all the way into the fence a little bit so we get a good cut. It's just a box that fits it down real tight. I have 2 of these automatic feeders. I didn't set out to have 2 on purpose. This one came as part of a package deal when I bought this shaper. It was a used equipment through a used equipment dealer, and he threw in this shaper. I just couldn't hardly say no. The deal was too good. This one's a 4-speed. This is the Jet. The other one's a Delta. If you're going to run a lot of material, I would highly recommend one because not only will it save you a lot of time, but it keeps your fingers away from the blade. Well worth the investment if you're going to run a lot of material. This is a Delta shaper. It's a 3-horse, has a 3/4 inch spindle. You can purchase a lot of different types of bits for these things. You typically find something like this in a cabinet shop for making molding or the edges of door panelings or something like that. I pretty much just use straight edges for making rabbet joints or entrances on nuke boxes and things like that. It's not something you absolutely have to have in a beekeeper's wood shop, but it does make things a lot easier. This is a 20-inch drill press, has a 1.5-horse motor. It really comes in handy for making the holes in lids. It's got about 10.5 inches between the post and the center of the spindle, so that gives us plenty of room for getting big pieces of plywood in there for lids and nuke box lids and things like that. Comes in handy for a lot of things. We have this 5-horse dust collection system. It works pretty good by Oneida Systems. It actually helps keep the air in here pretty clean too. This is an 8-inch Powermatic joiner. It's not something we use often, but when we do use it, it's really handy. Primarily we use it for straightening out the edge on a crooked board before we rip it into pieces. It's good for straightening out crooked boards. This is the most recent addition to my wood shop. It's an old Powermatic 18-inch planer. It was made when they really made these things quite solid. This one's in really good condition. I'm looking forward to using it. I've got a pole barn full of rough cut lumber that needs to be planed, and this is just a piece of equipment to do it.